International Women's Day 2022. Break the bias. What's at stake?
Gender inequality prevents wahine from fully participating in societies in Aotearoa and around the world.
Today, we'll be discussing some of the challenges women are facing. We'll also celebrate some of the gains we've made. We'll look at the history of global women and the role we play. And we'll speak to 3 special guests about the important mahi they are doing to help break the bias.
But first, it's time to introduce our navigator for today's event. A descendant of Ngai Tūhoi, Ngai Te Rangi and Ngāti Ranginui, this wahine toa has worked in the media and communications sector for more than 30 years. She is currently the Director of News and Current Affairs at Māori Television. Please welcome Wena Harawira.
Kai nā rākau tau matua, kai nā wāhine whakaruru hau. Tēnā koutou katoa I tēnei rā. Tēnā koutou I runa anō I te kaupapa nui whakaharahara, ara te rā e whakanui ana I nā wāhine o te ao whānui. International Women's Day is a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women. The day also marks a call to action for accelerating gender parity. Significant activity is witnessed worldwide as groups come together to celebrate women's achievements or rally for women's equality. Before we get started, I'd like to offer a short prayer just to kick us off. Tūtaua mai I runa, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te katoa, haumi e hui e, tai ki e. I summon from above, I summon from below, I summon from within and the surrounding environment, the universal vitality and energy to infuse and enrich all present, unified, connected and blessed. Nā reira tēnā koutou katoa. Well, marked annually on March 8th, International Women's Day is one of the most important days of the year to celebrate women's achievements, to raise awareness about women's equality, to lobby for accelerated gender parity. Now, the colours that symbolise International Women's Day are purple, green and white. Purple signifies justice and dignity. Green symbolises hope. White represents purity, albeit a controversial concept. The colours originated from the Women's Social and Political Union, a wing of the British suffrage movement. This virtual event on Break the Bias is presented in partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers and Global Women. We have around 400 women or attendees and from 52 partner organisations, Global Women members, members from the leadership program, all sorts of women, even those from Māori Television, have joined us today to celebrate International Women's Day and to hear what our guest speakers have to say and tell us about Break the Bias. Now, of course, for those of you who may be new to Global Women, it's a non-profit membership organisation that drives diversity in leadership in Aotearoa, New Zealand by promoting, encouraging and facilitating the development of women. So back to our kaupapa. What's at stake if we don't break the bias? Gender inequality prevents women from having a part in society here in Aotearoa and around the world. Until biases fade through education and our advocacy, women will continue to have worse life outcomes than men. Now we're offering, as I said, we have 3 great speakers that you'll soon hear from, but we'll also give you the chance to offer your own questions. If you look for the question and answer box or even the chat box, you can enter your questions there. You'll see later on in the program that we have an opportunity for our guest speakers to answer those questions. Just a brief rundown too of our program. Shortly, we'll hear from our first guest speaker, that is Teresa Gatting. Then we have Mark Russell from PwC. And finally, our last speaker is Chelsea Winstanley, Main Director. We will also then we will then have a panel discussion around 6:30 and half an hour from that. Around about 7 o'clock, we invite you, as I said, to submit questions that our panelists can answer. Right, I think we'll have a few closing remarks too, and our session will actually end around about 7:30. So let's hear from our first guest speaker. And this is where we play our video.
Our first guest is a New Zealand business leader, author, philanthropist and investor. Her autobiography, Bird on a Wire, is a bestseller. She is the New Zealand lead of SheEO, an international community that supports, finances and celebrates female entrepreneurs. Please welcome Global Woman Chair, Teresa Gitting.
Pamarie, Wahima, and Inetane, who are actually on this call as well. Welcome to you too. When I reflected about what I would talk about this evening with you all, I was struck, of course, by how well this group of wahine are across the issues. What could I say that was new, that would be inspiring? Some of you have been on panels already today, which other people have gone online and said were wonderful. I see Jane Wrightson's on this call, and the panel you were on this morning, Jane, has received rave reviews. So when I sat back, I decided that actually I was going to start by something that's quite personal, and actually is really quite a challenge for me, and that's to look at my own bias, to check my own bias, and to ask you to honestly look at yours. Really, in the spirit of, you know, we're all dealing with whatever backgrounds we came from and whatever we have programmed in, and learning to approach the world in a new way. All of us have a degree of bias internally, and to actually work on that before we proselytize and judge the rest of the world, it's important that we stand in our power and we call out bias. It's also important that we understand our own. So I'm going to start with something that I did a few weeks ago that so shocked me that even though I was at home, I was actually at my house in Tamaki Makaurau that day. Today I'm actually at my place in the Bay of Plenty, which is my Tauranga Waiwai. Anyway, I was at Tamaki Makaurau in my office, and I got a message. I can't remember now whether it was LinkedIn or Messenger, but I got a message from someone I didn't know. And this person had a name which I took to be a male name. And they said they were a financial planner and they wanted to invest in SheEO. And their clients want to invest in SheEO. So I assumed this person was a man. And thenceforth, we had a series of emails in which I explained you couldn't invest in SheEO, but if you activated, you could invest in the ventures that got selected each year by the women who were activators. And I went into great detail about how it all worked, etc., and great detail about how this person could activate for their partner, their daughter, female colleague, etc. And they sent, the whole conversation was very polite, was all online, and then they sent a one sentence back, a very humble one sentence. It said, Teresa, thank you for all of this, but I'm just a bit perplexed as to why I can't activate. And I sent back an email that said, because you're not a woman. And this person sent back an email, well, actually, for the last 57 years I have been, so that's great, I can invest. And I felt myself absolutely be so embarrassed and blush, and so thankful that she was so gracious about it. I then Googled her and saw that indeed she was a woman, and I realised that I had assumed, because it wasn't a name I recognised as male, it wasn't a name I recognised as female, and because the occupation was a financial planner, that it was a man who'd written to me. And I realised that had that person with that name I took to be male said they were a nurse who wanted to activate for SheEO, I would have had two discordant bits of information, male name, female occupation, and immediately Googled, and I would have seen was a woman. And so I realised that I, wahine toa for women, champion of woman, you name it, up and down Dale all day long with money and time and everything I've got, assumed that financial planners are men. So, I mean, I share that with you really in the spirit of a beggar showing another beggar where to find food. All of us have bias, and actually owning it, working to deal with it so that we can show up really fully healed and more fully present is really important. Okay, so that's me owning what I absolutely, if you held me down at gunpoint and said, do you have any gender bias? I would have said, absolutely not. But here in my own life, I showed to myself that actually I still do. Now let's turn to racial bias. So I grew up in Aotearoa. I didn't have a privileged background. I had a very loving background, but it wasn't one that had a lot of money. And we went to a very small school. It was a girls' school, a small Catholic school. And we all ran around together. And I could tell you a story that said, well, we were all equal. My sister Angela, who's on this call, and I played hockey together. And the captain of the hockey team was a Māori girl. Angela Paku was her name. But I really knew nothing about what her lived experience was like then or now. As I grew up, I saw wahine Māori really stand proudly in both worlds for their people and for women. And so over time, I've got used to the idea that Māori women can be, and many are, feminist. But I've had this view for a while, and in fact, I've got to confess, I've said it to a couple of people that, well, Pacifica women aren't really feminist. And again, I say that not really knowing their lives, but just in the interactions I've had, being very conscious that they stand for their Pacific peoples, and at least in the interactions I've had, don't seem to want to take a particularly feminist line. So I told myself that story, which sounds ridiculous, but anyway, I truly believed it. And then my sister Angela gave me Lana Lopez's book, That Bloody Woman, to read over summer. Oh my gosh, such an eye-opener. Those of you who haven't read it, I urge you to read it. And I realised again that I had a big mote in my own eye. This is the story of a Pacifica woman absolutely claiming everything about being a woman, wrestling with identity through her cultural lens and her understanding of the intersection of gender and culture. And don't we all have to deal with the intersection of gender and culture? Agnes reminded me again the other day that her kuia up in the Hokianga, who had the right to their own land, married or not, then saw the white settlers turn up, men and women, with men only able to own land, which meant that any Māori woman who married white settlers lost their land, regards the fact that, you know, after women got the vote in New Zealand, the next significant piece of legislation was married women being able to own property in their own name. That's just putting it back to what Māori women previously enjoyed before we all showed up. And that's an eye-opener too. You know, we think that we've made a lot of progress. But the National Council of Women, which was actually formed after 1893, after votes for women, set 3 goals. That one, that women could own property, married women in their own name. Second, that they could get custody of their children upon divorce. And thirdly, equal pay for work of equal value. And here we are, many years later, still struggling for that. So I just want to start really with those reflections about the importance of owning our own story and checking our own biases before we sail righteously forth, telling everyone else where they're going wrong. I want to talk a bit more about what I've just started talking about, because this started the video with a picture of a $10 note. Give me a Kate Shepherd on the $10 note. Now, I did hear from Prue Kapua that Mary Tetai was also going to be on a note. I don't know if that's happened yet, if it's going to happen, if that's with the Reserve Bank or whatever. But I'm often struck as I walk along the beach thinking about things, given that Agnes and I are now hand in hand on our mission to rise together, to actually have Pākehā women and Māori women of common cause shift the leadership dial together in New Zealand. And a few months ago, Global Women co-hosted a session, The Truth of Wahine Māori Women's Leadership. It was 8 a.m. on a Friday. Do you know how many people were on that call? Nearly 1,000 people. Sure, it was locked down. No one was driving cars anywhere, but still that's incredible. We are witnessing and have witnessed the rise and rise of Wahine Māori leadership in New Zealand, rising up in the iwi structure, rising up everywhere. And at the same time, we actually have a powerful platform where Pākehā women are actually starting to run all the banks, for example, to really have have hands on some of the levers of power. We've got such potential together. And I'm struck by the fact that back in 1893, the settler woman, white woman, and Māori woman got the vote on the same day. And yet there's no evidence. There is no written evidence. If any of you have oral evidence, I'd love to know about it, that Mary Tetai, who lived in the Hokianga, and Kate Shepherd, who lived in Ireland, ever met. How could they have met when it took, 3 or 4 days to travel that distance? There's no record of them meeting. And yet it can't be coincidence that Māori woman and Pākehā woman got the vote on the same day, because empowerment for women like that is never a coincidence. It's always a result of great mahi, great intention and great effort. And of course, Mary spoke in the Māori Parliament and urged not just the vote, but to be able to be an MP. Kate Shepherd had that in the bill, but dropped it because she couldn't get it across the line and got rejected twice. It wasn't until 1919 that Kiwi women were able to actually exercise power, not just vote for it. So that really brings me to today. And I hope I'm going to get the buzzer so I know when I'm going to speak, because I think this is actually going too long. But what I wanted to talk about really stays on the internal message. That's my message for tonight. What we do in the outside world is the manifestation of what's in us. And we do it because we cannot not do it. And what I think we're about, this kaupapa, is actually deeply spiritual. Sure, it's transactional as well in a way. Yes, we want to count the number of women in powerful positions, etc., but it's deeply spiritual. It's about balancing male and female energies in the world, the two wings, the masculine and feminine, rising and going together. It's not about one dominating the other. And a very wise Black woman, whose name is Quinita Robertson, who I will be sharing with you all at the Global Women Zooey in the early May. She's agreed to be a speaker. She's just written a book called The Inner Ground Railroad, and I'll bring some of those into New Zealand so that we can have them there for the session. The session will be virtual, but the books will be able to be distributed. She chooses to live in Ohio because Ohio was the first free state for slaves. Kentucky was the end of the road. It was the last slave state, and Ohio was the first free state. She chooses to live there. And she spends her life speaking, consulting to companies, working with women, healing, working on reconciliation and forgiveness with all sorts of groups, prisoners, all sorts of groups, men and women. And what she said to me on her kōrero a few weeks ago actually stopped me in my tracks. She said, the problem with the domination of the masculine energy in the world as we have it today, the problem with looking at the world through a white male lens, is that often what gets left out is God and nature. And then eventually, the more dominant that perspective becomes and the more crowded out different perspectives become, you actually end up thinking you are God. And in one way, we are God, but that wasn't really the way that she meant it, in terms of believing that we can dominate the earth, dominate the animals, dominate people who don't look like us in whatever shape or dimension they don't look like us. So I see that what we're about is bringing forth our energies to make whole ourselves, our homes, our companies, and our country. And I totally believe that we can lead the world. We're already seen as world leading in so many ways. And even though we are aware of all the ways that we still need to truly stand in our power, individually and collectively, we can be a beacon for the world. So I'm just going to finish, because I'm sure I'm on 15 minutes, to say, I encourage you to look at your own blind spots. Can you even bear to look at them? Can you bear to interrogate them? But don't dwell in it. Don't stay there. And don't lean in. Don't try and fit into the world the way it is. Don't focus on fixing yourself. Be the thing that you are and allow the unfolding. Ngā mihi nui.
Tēnā koe, Teresa. Ngā mihi nui kia koe mō tēnā kōrero mō wēnā whakamārama. Thank you very much for that presentation. It may interest you to know, and those who have joined us, that the word squaw has been, that's S-Q-A-W, has been removed from place names on federal government land in America. And Ohio was one of the first states to actually remove the word squaw from place names. Interestingly too, this has been led by the first cabinet minister of Native American descent. Her name is Deb Haaland. So kia ora, kia ia. Thank you very much. Well, our next speaker is Mark Russell, and we have a video introducing him. Let's hear from him.
Our next guest is the Chief Transformation Officer at PricewaterhouseCoopers and is responsible for leading the diversity and inclusion agenda within PwC New Zealand. Please welcome Mark Russell.
Tēnā katoa, tēnā koutou katoa, no Aotearoa ahau, ko Clyde Te Awa, ko Ben Lomond toku mana, ko Mark Russell toko ingoa. Kia ora everyone, I'm Mark Russell, and as the clip said, and some of those clips are getting pretty old, I'd have to say, I'm the Chief Transformation Officer at PwC, and also the co-leader of diversity and inclusion, and I'm also a tax partner. Thanks very much to Global Women for inviting me to participate in this very special occasion. I have to say it is somewhat intimidating, being one of what I imagine a relatively small number of men who are involved in this particular session, and I know you all quite rightly say, you know, now you know how it feels. But anyway, it is really great to be invited to speak with you. It's fair to say that I am probably not as well known to the general public as other fantastic participants. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So I was born in Scotland in a little steel town called Motherwell, just outside of Glasgow. And that was the kind of place where my parents didn't even get the chance to finish school before they were taken off to work to, you know, to help the family to survive. But I was extremely lucky that my parents got the opportunity to move to New Zealand when I was 5 years old, and we moved to Wellington, where my father got a job in a light bulb factory. And so I had the blessing of growing up in New Zealand, getting the benefits of the New Zealand education system, getting the chance to finish school and go on to university and go on to have a professional career, something that would have been absolutely unimaginable to the previous generation of my family. So I joined PwC straight out of university. I've been with PwC now for 28 years, starting in Wellington, 3 years in Dublin, and now based here in Tamakim Kauro. I have 5 children of my own, ranging in age from the oldest is 16 and the youngest has just turned 5 years old. And there's 3 girls and 2 boys in that wonderful brood. And look, it's coming up on 3 years since I was asked to get involved in diversity and inclusion, which I now co-lead with our Chief People Officer, Erin Venter. I thought, like Teresa, I thought it'd be useful to share a personal journey, but a somewhat different one to the one that she described. And I guess I'm here representing the literal old white male in a leadership position in a large New Zealand organisation. So look, I thought that it would hopefully be useful to explain my own relationship with bias, in the hope that that sheds some light on both the challenges and opportunities ahead of us if we're going to tackle these issues. And you know, Teresa gave a very passionate and wonderful case for why it's so important that we all, you know, as I think Tim Minchin says, take our personal views and prejudices out on the front porch and take to them with a cricket bat. I'm also going to make the case beyond that for how important it is. I think we're at the stage in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where if we're going to make the next level of progress, then we have to look, you know, really deeply at completely replumbing the system, because I think that's what it's going to take to achieve differences in outcomes and unlock a better tomorrow, not just for all of the women in New Zealand, but for you know, all of our New Zealand communities. So how did I reach that conclusion? And some of you might say, 28 years in a large organisation, you are the system, and that, you know, that's probably a fair challenge. But you know, let's re-reflect on that once I've shared my experience. So yeah, it's fair to say I'm a slow learner. I think that the story I'm about to tell you is I'm a slow learner. So you know, and I don't think I've ever experienced gender bias personally in my own life, but I do think I have a very good handle on what it is like to experience bias. Turning up in New Zealand in the early or the sort of mid to late 1970s as a impossibly pasty, freckly, very, very ginger, very, very skinny boy with a Glaswegian accent, I can assure you I definitely experienced bias on the playgrounds of Holy Cross School in Miramar. But the interesting thing is, even though I had that crash course primer in being on the lookout for bias, you know, I would be the first to admit that I spectacularly failed to see the how bias plays out in the world and the implications that has, you know, both for gender, for culture, you know, across all sorts of lenses. So, you know, I have very few good reasons to defend that poor track record. I did mostly attend co-ed schools, so I can't blame a unisex education. And I think in my defence, I did hit schooling and the time I entered uni and then entered the job market. You know, the participation level in education and getting into professional careers was very much 50-50. There were a lot of great initiatives promoting gender equality, which I was you know, very pleased to be supportive of, and would have thought of myself as a relatively, you know, right-on person who was you know, very much for the empowerment of women and for all people. But I reflect back now, and I think, you know, when I started in the workplace, it was absolutely clear that while my group of graduates starting in 1994 was pretty much 50-50 men and women, that didn't last long into what I could see ahead of me, either in our own organisation, other organisations I dealt with, clients, etc. But that wasn't a jarring experience, and it's quite hard to take yourself back now and see how that could have been acceptable. And the only way I can rationalise that without telling myself that I am an awful person, which I like to hope that I'm not, is that even at that stage in the mid-90s, this was all so baked in the cake, so normal, that I just couldn't see it as something that screamed out for attention. And then, progressing through my career, you start to see, there was what I didn't personally witness was just outright explicit bias that would have caused me to stand up and take notice. But then once you've been around a while, you do start to realise that that the women are leaving more quickly than the men. And even once I got into leadership roles where I was really responsible for mentoring and coaching of successful women, when any one of those people would choose to move on, often choosing to leave the profession altogether, I was always able to convince myself that was a very that decision was very much about their own personal circumstances and what made sense to them as individuals. But you do then get to a point where you start to realise that something's a bit wrong here, and the outcomes are clearly not equitable. And what is my role in that? And to be honest, that can be really challenging, because you can't, other than the obvious things that people would have talked about in the day around, generally around childbirth and childcare, the root causes of why these different outcomes were perpetuating just weren't obvious, and it seemed sort of insurmountable to personally find a way through that. And really that only changed for me when I that two sort of things happened about the same time. So first of all, some very strong and courageous women within our own organisation stood up very strongly and very articulately laid out the challenge, explained the outcome in stark ways that it was hard to ignore, and then started asking some really difficult questions. And at the same time, I also had the chance to work alongside some absolutely amazing female leaders that I'd happened to be asked to work alongside in other areas of the business. And it was an absolute revelation to witness how different the techniques were for achieving success within the things that they'd been given to do within the organisation. And I don't mean that in really sort of stereotypical gender things about what men are good at and what women are good at, but actually just recognising that there are a lot of different ways that you can achieve good outcomes, and there are some tactics being deployed here that I've never seen before. And that's suddenly opened my eyes to the fact that organisations, and certainly in New Zealand, but I suspect elsewhere, it's very easy to build up cultural norms around what good looks like, what success looks like. And, it is the presenteeism and the hard workism and all of the cliches about what that looks like, which makes it hard if all of the decision makers are coming from that point of view to see another possibility in other people. So that was really the beginning of me having insight into the fact that there's a lot of things that I hadn't been seeing. It was like being sort of suddenly given night vision goggles and seeing a whole other world that existed that I hadn't previously been able to see. And maybe I'll just give you a very specific example of what that can look like. And I'd ask that you don't laugh at me when I tell you the story, because it is somewhat embarrassing. one of the areas of challenge that my colleagues sort of put forward was around, the obviously really important area of how do we go about assessing performance and then directing reward and promotion and the giving of the good opportunities and all the things that lead to advancement, and saying, how can it be the case that 3 old white men can go into a room and make a high quality decision about the way in which a group of people, which includes a diverse range of people, how can they possibly stand in judgment and the people involved have confidence that all of the things that they would hope to be true and taken into account have been taken into account. And I was offended by that statement, personally offended, because I knew I wasn't one of those old 3 white men, but I knew them very well. And they were some of the most wonderful, forward-thinking, right-on white men you could possibly hope to have sitting in a room and standing in judgment on you. But it was really then the intersection of, Teresa, you raised the important intersection between gender and culture. And it absolutely was encountering the intersection of other lenses of diversity and inclusion, around culture and ethnicity and sexuality, that and even generational change, right? So the fact that when you would be talking about issues to do with the rainbow community, with the Māori community, the Pacific community, our significant Asian community, and across the board, the sort of the Gen Zers joining all of our organisations who have got very strong opinions about how they want to be involved with them. And the thing that's common across all those lenses is that no decision about me without me. So if you want to be making decisions that are going to really affect my life, then I need to know that people who understand my worldview and where I'm coming from, and the different ways that I might make a contribution are represented in that room. And I suddenly had that realization that, wow, the difference that is obvious to me, people from different cultures, people from different generations, I can see really clearly how systemic, or how the system produces different outcomes if we aren't really careful. But gender is so, we all grow up experiencing gender, and the differences have been so baked in our global culture, certainly our Western culture, our New Zealand culture, and then the culture within each of our organisations, that I and I suspect many other men literally have not been able to see the kind of differences that you would take for granted, and so that's had me reflecting on a few things. I'm just kind of checking how I'm going for time here, so I'll wrap up. So I guess my core observations there are, we do have to change the system if we want to produce sustainably different outcomes. So the existing settings are laser engineered to produce the current outcomes. That's why they are the sustained current outcomes. If we collectively, as a country, as organisations, want to produce different outcomes, then we're all going to have to find ways to actually change the way that the plumbing works inside our organisations, inside our communities, inside our country. So yes, the areas like this do need strong leaders to stand up and make bold commitments and take important days like today when we celebrate the need to stand up and reinforce how important these aspirations are. But then we also have to do the hard and unglamorous work of sort of getting under the bonnet and really changing the way things are engineered. I think I've about done my time there. I look forward to discussing that more in the future conversation. But thank you very much for having me, and I really look forward to the rest of the conversation. Ngā mihi nui.
Ka pai, Mark, tēnā koe I wena kōrero I o whakamahuki. I like your title, Chief Transformation Officer. It's a great title anyway. Our next speaker is coming up, and it is Chelsea Winstanley. Let's hear about her.
Our final guest for the day is an award-winning filmmaker, producer, director and writer. A descendant of Ngāti Ranginui and Ngai Te Rangi, she is the first Indigenous female Oscar nominee for Best Picture for her celebrated feature film Jojo Rabbit. She produced the Te Reo Māori version of the Disney hit Moana and is set to release Lion King and Frozen in Te Reo this year. Please welcome Chelsea Winstanley.
Tihei Mauri ora, kia tau te rangi Māori e kia tātou. Ko te me tuatahi he mihi atu kia māreikura, he rangatira koe wena, tēnā koe mō tō awhi kia mātou, mō tō kai karakia I te ata I te pōnei, kia ora e hoa, e te whanaunga. Wow, kei te hariko au. Ko te me tuarua Mark, rawa ko Teresa, ngā mihi nui ki tō kōrero, kei te whakatautoko ngā wahine katoa. Ko waiau, kei te taha o tōku māma, no Ngai Te Rangi me Ngā Te Rangi Nui oku iwi, no Tauranga Moana hau, ko piri rākau, te hapu, te paparoa, te marae. Kei te taha o tōku pāpā, he Pākehā ahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. What a pleasure to join you this evening, it really is. And I didn't realize, but I am the symbol of hope. I have got my kakahu kakariki on tonight, even my matematia kakariki. I didn't do that on purpose, but perhaps I'm being the last of all, and maybe, should I say the youngest? Is that a bit whakatoi to say that? But I will. I'm going to be the youngest and maybe shed some light, shed some hope. Bias is a really interesting thing. I've been reflecting on it too, and I love the fact that we're all reflecting on our own personal stories. For me, this year, I tēnei I've started a journey on mai reo rangatiratanga, and I've gone back to, to university. I've gone back to school, and I'm studying Te Reo Māori full time. And I'm doing that because I have two little young kōrero in this whare with me who go to an immersion school. And you know what I realized most, not only do I have the stories of my grandmother who from that generation who was beaten at school for speaking her language, but I have these two beautiful kōrero who are growing up in the reo, and I need to be able to support them at home because, it's all well and good that we send our babies to kohanga and we send them to kura kaupapa Māori, but as soon as they exit those gates and they have to enter the world that we all live in and that we all share, the world is Pākehā everywhere. And so they are constantly having this whawhai within themselves, and me too, that I have to try and support them. So it's kind of been a massive journey to try and drop everything that I thought was important, that I thought was about me, and I thought was about, my career and whatnot. But this is about fulfilling something deeper. But it's really made me think about, bias. And sometimes I feel like gender bias is a bit of a distraction, and I'm probably going to be controversial in saying that. But what I mean is that we need to actually think about cultural bias. To get rid of the gender bias, we need to go back and actually look at our cultural bias in this country, because if we really, really knew and understood Māori culture and Indigenous culture, you would know automatically the equality that exists between wahine, tāne. You would understand that the first tangata, the first person was hine ahuone. It was a woman. I mean, Māori are so smart. They already got it down. If we go back in time, well, honestly, we would we would fix everything. I'm telling you right now. And we'd have a bloody good time doing it because Māori are really funny and we'd be laughing and singing away and we'd be learning awesome waiata as we go. But seriously, I'm not kidding. I've been thinking about this a lot. And so for me, we need to sort out our cultural bias in this country first. Because these systems, you know, that Mark talks about breaking systems down, they're exactly designed to do what they are doing. Their system of patriarchy is keeping our women down. We need to get rid of the actual system, and we need to like transform it. It needs to be something else, but we've got it here. You know, the thing about that I love, the difference between a Western mindset and an Indigenous mindset is a Western ideology truly believes that they are born with rights. Whereas in an Indigenous mindset, you are born with obligation, and you are born with obligations to your whānau, your hapu iwi, your community, and to the land, and to the past, the present, and the future. Now, oh my God, that just blows my mind, because if we actually took that on board and understood that, we wouldn't be having all this raru with the gender stuff, because all the dudes would be totally on board with equality, and they would be understanding what we as women need. If I look at my own situation and the bias I've kind of, I suppose, experienced in my work and the mahi of film and television, you know, a lot of it and this happens in every profession, of course. And Mark, you talked about maternity leave and things like that. When I had my first baby at 20, and I went back to university because I knew intrinsically inside, I was like, I am not going to stay on the benefit and be a statistic. I have to do something better. But I already then came with a label, you know, to everything. I went to university, I was considered an adult student, an old lady. I was only like 23 or something by the time I finished my degree, but I was at school with these 18-year-olds learning about email on Pegasus. And I was like, oh my God. But, you know, I already came with this label, this kind of statistic. And then I, you know, fell into like a dream job where I was working at a Māori production company run by incredible Māori women. And I felt very, very supported in that environment. And then later on in life, and, you know, as you go, you're climbing this kind of ladder of, you know, proving that you're good enough in this field, because it's very male dominated, especially in those areas of directing, especially in the areas of anything behind the camera, for example, cinematography. We're really good at producing, because I think just as women in general, anyway, we know how to awhi, and it's almost like a film or a TV show is like a baby, and you got to nurture this baby from the conception right through to production and on through, you know, to putting it on screen. And so we're really, really good at those roles. But I noticed when I first started working, all I wanted to do was make docos, because my hero was Mera Tamita. I had seen that she did this with 5 kids on her own. I was like, oh my Lord, if she can do that, what the hell's holding anyone back, you know? So that was a real marker and a real inspiration for me, was to see her do that. And so you're kind of chipping away at that, and, you know, you're trying to get better and hone your skills. And then, oh, hello, you get hapu again. And it wasn't a plan, but I did. So I had 2 more beautiful babies. And of course, I would never take that back. But it's true, when you become hapu and you have a baby, you've got a job to do. And that is to find this baby that's growing inside you. And I really think we've got to change our perception on what that is, what that role is of bringing this new life into the world. Because that in of itself has never been enumerated properly. We don't acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge the fact that women literally have to take time out of their jobs, out of their careers, to nurture that baby, and you step off the kind of trajectory. Oh, hello, the men are going, see you later, and they're off, they're having a good old time. And fair enough, whatever. But we need to be able to support our women to come back into that workforce environment and workspace, and give them the skills and support that they need to get back exactly where they were, not then have to go, oh, I'm down here now and trying to get back up again. So I've had a little bit of a bumpy road like that myself. And sometimes, you know, you have to keep going, and it's really tiring. Like, I've got 2 kids out there at the moment. I was like, shush, you can't come in here. I'm doing this really important thing, and I've got to look like I'm really professional. Quick, I'm like, I've only just got back from the office and from school, and I'm like, Uber Eats, terrible. That's not good fun, it's therapy. That's bloody terrible. But this is what we have to do as solo mums. You know, you're just making all these not so great choices sometimes. Hoya no. When I was writing some notes about representation in film and the bias. This is a space that I really, really am excited about and want to get into and move into more and more in my career as I get older, because what I've also experienced is, representation on screen matters, and seeing ourselves on screen matters. And Merata talked about this all the time. And I want to reflect on a film that, came out last year, Cousins, which was an incredible film, an amazing film, beautiful film. And that smashed everyone's expectations. Did over $1 million at the box office. No one thought it would. And the reasons why is because way back in the day when Merata first had that script and she was shopping it around with Patricia Grace, she was turned down several times from the funders, and they said to her, it's in writing, even in letters, they said to her, no one would ever want to see a story about 3 Maori girls, Merata. Well, you know what? Yeah, they would actually. And we do want to see that. And so when you allow us to be in charge of our own stories, you better be damn straight. We're going to get the audience, because we are half the audience. So here's the problem I have with the way the distribution model is in this country. So in order to get a film made, and this really, really grates me, in order to get a film made, you have to have someone, which we call distributor, who is going to say, yeah, sure, I'll put some time and effort and maybe a little bit of money into marketing that film, and I'll back you, and I believe in you, sure. And then not only that, you then have to have the exhibitors, be that the cinema screens, the Rialtos, whatever, the Hoyts, say, yes, we'll play that film and we'll give it some really good time and space, and we'll put it on for however long weeks. Well, the thing is, most of these places, the distributors and the exhibitors, are all white dudes. Now, they don't give a toss about our stories because they don't understand them. That is the plain truth of the matter. So it's such a fight and it's such a struggle to have to go to a distributor and try and explain the story, which you and I'm sure most of the people on here, Mark, bro, good on you for hanging in and being a part of this. Maybe you would enjoy it too, and you should. But there are so many stories that we could all share and enjoy and love if we were just given the opportunities. So if there's any bias I want to break that bias. I want to smash that distribution and exhibition model to the ground, because it doesn't serve us. It's a system that does not serve us. So we need to change it. We need to participate in it. In order to change any system, anything at all, we need to participate and be part of every single system that exists. I don't like all the systems. Look at the judicial system. It's terrible. It does nothing. Well, actually, it does exactly what it's been designed to do, to keep Maori people down and other people up here. It will always do what it's designed to do. So we need to reinvent. But honestly, we just got to go back to an Indigenous mindset. And we have to acknowledge that Indigenous people already have the mātauranga. We've already got the knowledge. You just have to share the power. It's all it comes down to. And don't be afraid. It won't hurt a little bit. In fact, it's going to be amazing for everybody. I promise. And also, silence is violence. So if you don't do anything, just on a daily basis, anything, call someone out. If you see bias around you, just call it out. Be brave enough. Be brave enough. Have I gone over my 15 minutes? Probably not, eh? Winner, you tell me.
You've got another 3 minutes, maybe another 3 minutes just to wrap up.
Oh, another 3 minutes. Okay. I was trying to be like, yeah, I'm gonna reply to that point, Teresa, because that was really, really good. Yes, when you talked about women rising up, but yes, we are rising up. We are rising up, but we're rising up too slowly, to be fair, because there's still people, there's still the gatekeepers. There are still the gatekeepers that exist. So if you are in a room and you know a woman in that room who can, you should be shouting her name from the rooftops and supporting that woman, making sure she is heard. Often we go into these rooms full of, in high-powered places, perhaps, and we need each other. We need each other to support one another and to help one another get through these places. And it's okay, because you know what? There's enough for everybody. We shouldn't be scared of sharing. There's actually enough for everyone. And the more we do, the more space we create for one another. So I'll just leave you with that. Silence is violence. Don't be afraid to speak up and share the power. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tū mai rā, maua o mauna. Tēnā koe. Ka pai, Chelsea, tēnā koe iwi nā kōrero. We are moving on to the next part of our program now. It's a panel discussion, which includes all three of our guests. And we'll be putting some of the questions that just goes over the presentations that they've given us. One thing I wanted to ask you, Chelsea, is what's more important for women in the film industry? Is it acknowledgement through the awards that they win? Or is it work, actually getting work and having a block of work that they can call on and point to? Is that what moves them forward in the industry? Or the awards, the blend?
Yeah, well, kia ora, it really depends on what environment you kind of want to work in, you know, like Hollywood is a very manufactured place, and it's very made up, and it's made up of businesses that just support one another. And what I mean is that you have all these producers and directors and lawyers and managers, and they're all working in a circle just to keep themselves going, to be fair. And so they're all just going to push each other and push each other's clients and whatnot. If you want to work in that space of Hollywood and that world, kei te pai, go for it. But learn how to like have a bit of a shit sieve, because you got to get through all the kaka that's kind of going to be thrown at you. And that sometimes that's quite hard. But if you want to work in that Te Ao Māori space, here's the it's not a problem, it's a beautiful thing. But there's a humility that's involved, and that we really admire about Māori culture. And there's something about being humble, and the kumara doesn't speak of its own sweetness and all that kind of stuff. And you do your work for your community, and you can do all sorts of work in that way. It kind of goes hand in hand, because yes, if you want the big money perhaps, or you want people to take notice, then yes. If I say, does having the Jojo Rabbit Oscar nomination, that kind of stuff, has that helped me? Yes, it has. But does it make me so proud of that work? Yes, but my most proudest moment would be when I got Ava DuVernay from Array Now to pick up Mera Te Hau Mum to colonise that screen, because to me she exudes everything that supports women and people of colour and minorities in film. So I see that as more than I would the Oscar thing. Like, to me, that means a lot more.
One more thing, just on the note of cultural bias, mention was made that you are producing the te reo version of The Lion King. Why aren't the lions, the king and Simba and all the kings, why aren't they from Tauranga Moana? Why are they from Tainui?
Well, you know, we thought we better do a bit of a nod to the kingitanga. The beautiful thing, I know we're all kings and queens, eh? I get you, it's whanonga. But what we loved about being able to take that film, because you have all these beautiful characters within the jungle and within that environment anyway, that we could give all these different animals a different mita. So it was about being able to celebrate te reo Māori as a whole, like, and just because I suspect that the majority of Pākehā within this country don't know that there are so many different mita to celebrate. And so we're going to be able to just have those little moments for all those young kids up at Tai Tokoro or Te Kahanunu to, like, just, hold on to their reo. It's going to be beautiful. So yes, this time we take a bow to the kingitanga and we say, Anei tainui.
Kia ora. Teresa, if I can come to you next. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, is entrepreneurship a family trait? Teresa.
Unmute. Can you hear me? Yeah. That's a great question, because our father was a small-time entrepreneur, always. So maybe I grew up with it. But for me, when I left university, there wasn't really such a thing as entrepreneurs. Everybody worked for large companies, and so I did. And so I came to it quite late and accidentally, and then realised that it really suited my personality. And as we all know, once you've got used to not having a boss, you never want to go back, right? So, once you become self-employed, you never want to go back. And I do think that is the energy of our times. The YWCA's 25 women under 25 in Aotearoa, New Zealand last year, not a single one of those young wahine worked for anyone. They were all self-employed, either social entrepreneurs, for-profit entrepreneurs, etc. And so one of my missions is to try and equal the playing field. So last year in the world, the survey's just come out, in the world, best year ever for deals. Percentage of deals that got funded, either at startup or scale up, that went to all male founder teams. 75% of the deal flow went to all male teams. Percentage of the deal flow that went to all female teams, 3%. Percentage of the deal flow that went to mixed gender teams, quite often man and woman, a husband and wife, but obviously man and woman, just over 20%. And so we've got such a long way to go to unleash women's potential in the world through starting and scaling up their businesses. And it's really where the rubber hits the road, because it's so about money and who has the money and who has the power. So this is a mahi that is essential for New Zealand, because we are a nation of traders. We are very entrepreneurial, and we can make a difference here. We're big enough and we're small enough, but it does take those of us who are passionate about it to keep pushing.
Do we need to present a sense of obligation to the government that they have a job to enable us to do what you've just said?
Yeah, well, I got invited to speak at a breakfast session tomorrow to women MPs, which I said yes to, even though I never get up early and do breakfast sessions for any other reason. And that is the message I'm going to give them. If the government looked at all the money that is spent supporting entrepreneurs in New Zealand, not just money, mentoring services, everything, and insisted that they ran a gender lens over it, women would benefit so much if they got even 40% of the available funding. They don't have to spend another dollar. They just have to properly channel a fair shake for women entrepreneurs, and in particular women of colour, because you've seen the gender pay gap stats. It's even worse for women of colour. And that's why women choose to try and do it themselves.
I was hard-pressed to try and find some kind of government policy that would show that the government is actually thinking about this. All I got was Jan Tinetti, the Minister of Women's Affairs, telling us that the gender pay gap has dropped 0.5% to 8.6%, which isn't too bad. You know, that's pretty good. And it is on the decline, but still not enough.
The public sector, both actually under the former Minister of Women's Affairs, who was a Green MP, Juliet Genter, and under Jan, Labour MP, have done quite a good job on trying to reduce the gender pay gap, but they are all on salary. Yeah. So they don't understand the life of those of us who are self-employed, who work for entrepreneurs or who are entrepreneurs. They don't really quite get it. It's not about the gender pay gap. It's about access to capital. It's about government support. It's about getting tax breaks for childcare. You know, there's a whole lot of things that. Now, I do want to call out NZTE. NZTE, I think, are the leading government department in supporting female entrepreneurs. Of all the ministries I've dealt with, they do seem to be, you know, it's no accident. You know, Tracy Hopeup is on their board, and they've got some wonderful women. Actually, I think Lisa Thompson's on this call. They've got some wonderful women in senior positions who are driving this along. So, but I feel like you know they're not joined in a startling way by a lot of the other ministries. And Ministry for Women it's only a policy. It doesn't have any money. Doesn't have the money. Doesn't have the putia. You need the putia.
Tēnā koe, I support that. Mark, can I come to you, please? Organisations need to break the bias. Tell me your 3 big ticket items about how organisations can break the bias immediately.
Just the easy questions for me is it'll be hard sticking to 3. Let me think about it. So the one I talked about before, like performance assessment, reward for performance and promotion. and all of the things that flow through that. So, you know, do you have properly diverse groups of people sitting in judgment of performance? And have you got the right structures set up in terms of mentoring relationships and so on? You know, obviously things like systematically running pay equity, gender pay gap, cultural pay gap type analysis, so that you are systematically, so you try to put yourself in a position to eliminate the bias by having the right people involved, but then having the the analysis sitting in behind that, so that you can root out any situations where it does come up. So that one is key. I think the sort of trifecta of parental leave, flexibility, and bringing family into the workplace. So that, I know that's 4 things, but I'm going to cheekily sneak those in. So I know it feels a bit weird talking about this in a hybrid work environment under COVID, but going back to the before times, there wasn't genuine flexibility in a lot of organisations, and the burden of that falls principally on, or fell principally on women. So continuing, and with our new hybrid ways of working, is about having genuine flexibility, reimagining the way that parental leaves. Chelsea spoke really articulately about that. That's not just about the time you get off when you're having a child, but it's about what happens when you get pregnant, or your spouse gets pregnant. And realistically, men have to accept as much responsibility for what happens with children as women. Otherwise, we are going to perpetuate a lot of those outcomes. So, what are the ways that if everybody does that, right? So if every organisation gave equal parental leave to everybody, there wouldn't be any marginal cost involved to anyone, because your woman would be around and available to work as much as your men now went away. But it's important, not just for reducing the time that people have out of the career, as Chelsea was referring to, but also just normalising this as a major life event, recognising that it's basically a crash course MBA in life packed into the space of a year, and that the kind of perspectives and maturity that you get from being a parent actually creates value that you can bring into your workplace afterwards. And then all of the post-child, the childbirth is just the beginning, right? As the parent of 5 kids, I know painfully that there's a lot of picking up and dropping off, and who collects people when they're sick, and women have borne the brunt of that, and there has to be more sharing of that. It has to be considered completely normal for me to go and pick my sick child up from school and miss a meeting, the way that it has for women. So a lot packed in there, but hopefully that makes sense. And could I just say, I know not all women in the workplace have children and want to have children, but I think those things are as important. They're important for everyone. Like I say, change the norms and the expectations, and going back to that sort of horrible time when you would hear people say things like, well, there's no point in promoting that person because they're just going to go and have a baby, and trying to move organisations away from a point-to-point thing, thinking about the individuals and the time away rather than thinking about it. If we do a good job of this, imagine the amazing impact that's going to have on our ability to retain the very best talent that we spent so much time and energy recruiting at the beginning, and then just sort of allow to sort of drift through our hands like sort of grains of sand, just slipping away. And I think every organisation is almost at crisis point in terms of its need for key talent. So why wouldn't you make some of these key investments in such an obvious area of need?
In terms of diversity too, you were telling me about the introduction of whakatau into PwC's induction of staff. Tell me about that again.
Yeah, and Chelsea also called this out, how important Indigenous worldviews and te ao Māori from a Aotearoa New Zealand point of view are to bringing these things to life, because traditional Western culture has been absolutely firewalled your work life from your personal life. I mean, it's not that long ago people would barely even acknowledge that their family existed in an attempt to show how professional and focused on work they were. And even as times have evolved and with the focus on well-being and so on, we've all become much more in tune with the whole of life, and in lockdown, obviously seeing into people's bedrooms and front gardens and so on. But it was really weird. So when we, it was obviously a great positive development, having Maori partners being admitted to the partnership, and they were quite rightly being adamant that, hey, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do it in a culturally appropriate way. So we have to have proper whakato. And we had those experiences, and they were incredible and very moving affairs that you could just feel them change the whole cultural landscape of the organisation. And immediately you could see all the Pākehā turning to each other and be like, man, this is pretty cool, having like your people's family involved and people from their communities and sharing in this experience. Whereas before, it would have been like, I do not want anyone to meet my dad. My career will be dead, or someone meets my sister, it's all over for me. And completely flipping that around and thinking, man, what a milestone this is in someone's journey. And why wouldn't we want to bring in the whole community that's relevant to them, and especially including their family, into that? So it's, I think, helped us to really change the whole way we think about your work life as part of the balance of your overall life. So sorry, that was a really long answer, but
that's okay. One of the things I also wanted to ask you about just quickly is that banks and banks marketers frequently research gender, and they tend though to report more differences than similarities between men and women, and that in itself is a source of bias too, isn't it? Do organisations also do that, report on the differences rather than the similarities between men and women?
Look, I'd have to admit it. That's not a way of thinking about it that had leapt out to me before. But I can completely see what you're getting at, and I think when you go to the core of this. It absolutely at the core of diversity and inclusion, and it's inclusion that is ultimately the key, and that will attract and enable diversity, is recognising what we have in common, and yes, the important differences, and how much we need to celebrate and be empathetic to those really critical differences. But most of empathy is actually coming to terms with how incredibly similar we are, despite all our apparent differences. So yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for that.
Can I bring you back, Teresa, on this matter? Women, according to the Retirement Commission, they did a study, and they found that women plan their budget and stick to it. Women save rather than buy on credit. Women cut back on spending rather than use a credit card. And women save for the unexpected rather than spend what they have. They will do practical things like that.
Well, some of that's good. It's about husbanding resources, and it's about, it's a practical approach to life. But in the world of work, in the world of business, taking risk is rewarded. And I was brought up with a father who was a feminist, and so he encouraged us to take risk. He was a small-time entrepreneur, like I said, and so I've always been comfortable taking risk, but a lot of women are not. And I remember a time in my life when, in fact, my partner had just left. I'd had to give him, he'd taken half of our assets. The asset I had was a leaky house, a leaky apartment, which might never be fixed. But I went for dinner with other people who were in that apartment, and we celebrated, even though we hadn't even settled, even though we hadn't. It's sort of like you've got to believe in abundance. I believe in abundance. Money's just energy. There's enough for all. Chelsea said it in a different way. There's enough for all. We have enough for all. Women are brought up to believe in scarcity. We compete for men. We compete for money. We don't need to be like that. There is enough for all of us. And so if you believe there's enough for all, and you're living a life of just learning and unfolding, you can take risks because you can always learn and move on. But that is hard. It's hard to, if it's not in your DNA. And also, of course, it's when women go to present their businesses, it's really well documented that women are asked penalising questions. Who will look after your children? And what happens if this doesn't work out? Whereas men are asked questions of opportunity. Have you thought about going global? Or that is really well documented. I'm not making this shit up. It is a really well documented. It has a better phrase than I'm giving it. And so that reinforces the idea that women should be kept small and in our place and not take risks. We're okay with a little home baking business, but it's not okay if we actually want to run businesses of scale. And so this is quite near and dear to my heart. I fund women entrepreneurs, I coach women entrepreneurs, I encourage women entrepreneurs. And if you just want to have a small business, that's fine. That's fine. There's no judgment about that. But I really want women. I mean, just yesterday I wrote quite a blistering email to a man who shall remain nameless, very powerful in the New Zealand VC scene. And I said, are you serious about shifting the dial on female entrepreneurs, or you're only going to back companies where it's men and women, where you're not really taking a risk because, really you're just backing the man? And actually gave a very thoughtful response. I won't tell you his name because I actually think he is a genuine. But that's the thing. I love that silence is violence. I'm in awe of Celia Robinson. She's decades younger than me, my dear friend and business partner. She's just take no prisoners ballsy. Won't put money into a situation where it's not equal representation of women on the board, calls it out every day. And I still, even though I seem quite a wahine toa, seem quite fearless, I still have a little part of me that's, that's of my generation that was quite polite and didn't call it out. And I see fearless women in their 20s and 30s, some wahine Māori, some like Celia, Europeans chosen to live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, calling it out. And I think we should be fearless in calling it out. We have to stand together, raise our voice together, because otherwise it isn't going to change.
Chelsea, can I ask you, are you fearless and ballsy, or do you have role models in your world in the film industry that teach you how to be fearless and ballsy and take risks?
Yeah, I think I do, and I did when I got my first job at Kiwa Productions. I was working with Rhonda Kite in the Wihakaraia. Rhonda was so fearless in terms of, Teresa, you talk about women maybe, have a little cake shop or whatever. This woman, I walked fresh out of university. I've got this 5-year-old little baby boy at school, and here she is, kids, grandkids. I think she was probably in her mid-40s then, maybe. And she had an post-production audio studio. She had a production studio. She was creating software, which is now used. I've seen it, and we are using this software for these Disney projects. But she was like, my God, for someone who just kept going. And I would also see her have knockbacks, and she would just get knocked down and get back up again, literally. And it was so inspiring for me to see that. I think that really, really helped me as a young mum too, because she was a young mum. Young solo mum, really, really young mum as well. So to kind of have those mentors and to see that in front of you and to know that you can actually reach those heights is really, really inspiring. And, also to be humble enough and vulnerable enough to show that I'm falling down and I might need to have a bit of a cry in the office today. And that's cool because I do that sometimes too. And I'm probably more open with my daughters than I was with my son. Back then, yes, Rhonda Kite, Jenny Prisk, I see you saying that. I adore her and adore Libby. Like, look at Libby Hakaraia now, down in Otaki. She's created the largest Indigenous film festival that we have in the South Pacific and an incredible Māori land hub. I mean, yes, I'm surrounded by incredible women all the time. And I even reached out to Teresa, like stalked her recently going, hey, can we have coffee together? Because I know I need to have strong women around me because I either need to hear their stories. This is not the right word to use, a bit of a perv, but I love to hear other people's journeys, and I love to hear other people's stories because it allows me to know that there's history to everybody's journey, and be okay about my own history. I think sometimes we're really hard on ourselves about our own journeys. Either we haven't done enough, or we've gone too much down that way, or I failed here or whatever. And failing is good. You hear all the time, you got to fail to know how to do something better. But it's true. And I think we need to do it more, and we need to share our failings with each other more. And that's the only way we can support, because it also helps younger women coming up, but yeah.
Chelsea and Rita, Rhonda Kite was on the Global Woman panel that I facilitated in December. So she was one of our panelists, and she was amazing. And Agnes and I have asked her a couple of times to join Global Woman, but she feels like she's very busy up north and she's got a lot on. So if you can try and get her in the Waka, that'd be great. And Libby, I'd never heard of Libby, and I've heard about her 3 times in the past week from your seat at the table. And Catherine Coach called me because she wants to nominate her to be a member. So another wonderful wahine Māori to jump in our Waka.
Yes, there's plenty more coming your way, Teresa, don't you worry.
Well, kia ora koutou. I am now going to open it up to our question and answer session, and invite attendees to submit some question, please, for our panelists to answer. Chelsea Penny Harrison, I see in the chat box, is saying, good reflection that life isn't what happens to you, but what you do with it. Good reflection, Chelsea. Okay, I have a question. Mark discussed, this is for you, Mark. Mark discussed the idea of needing to change the plumbing across business, across community, government, and society as a whole. A question to Mark and Teresa: where does this responsibility lie? Where does it start? Who does it start with? And is there a role for Māori in resetting the way forward for breaking all bias in New Zealand? To you first, Mark, please.
Great question. Look, I think there's roles right across the different groups that were set there, and there was a question before about the role of government. I think there definitely is some role for government, whether that's around mandatory reporting or other measures. But I think that I don't think that any organisation should be approaching this on the basis that it's somebody else's problem. I think we need to all approach it on the basis that it's actually a burning issue that questions the sustainable future of our organisations, because it's about our ability, whatever our organisation is for, unless we have the very best diverse range of talent focused on that mission going forward in today's complicated, multifaceted world, we're not going to succeed. So I think it's incumbent on all of the people who are involved, who are leaders in an organisation, to think this is our generation's problem. I think that those of us who are fortunate to be in leadership positions, there's an amazing opportunity here to leave a collective legacy where we can all look back and say that's when we solved most of it. It was in the 2020s. We early 2020s, we pretty much smashed out most of the things here, and I think that's it's realistic that can be done. So I think there's a great conversation. I'm interested in Teresa's views on the other bits that you can add to that. But I do think organisations, I think the private sector has a big weight of responsibility.
To you now, Teresa.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really do think the private sector has a big weight of responsibility, because as I was asked today by News Hub about mandatory gender pay gap reporting, I do support that. But if it was to happen tomorrow, we're going to get what happened in Australia. It's been honoured in the breach rather than, in any way that's made any material difference to what women are paid. Whereas the UK are doing it differently. And if the private sector gets momentum on this, then it will be much easier to get government to do it, and then we'll bring the laggards along. So But the first answer to the question is, it all is, I agree with Mark, starts with us. The particular thing for this group is Global Women set up Champions of Change a few years ago. And the idea was that the corporate partners of Global Women, who are the champions, would become the leaders. They would actually hold themselves to account, and the rest of the business community. And that has happened, but it's gathering a pace now, and it's got to carry on. And Agnes and I have just done the renewal calls for most of our partners. We would have done kōreros with 30 CEOs in the last 2 or 3 months. And 44 of them have now signed the Mind the Gap Pay Registry. They either are reporting on pay gaps or they're committed to in the next year. And most of them do think they have a plan for how to deal with gender. And they're all waking up to the fact that there's an intersectional world and it isn't just gender. And they're going, we don't really know how to deal with ethnicity. We know that we need to face into this. And actually, that was Agnes's brilliant idea, Wahine, to bring you guys on to partner with Māori TV to increase our capability that we can accelerate this. And we can. We are only 400 people and 55 partners and our other wider partners. But we could transform New Zealand because we have so many of the movers and shakers and we have so much power and influence. We can make the difference.
Question from Freya Wakenshaw. In my role, I often get the pleasure of coaching and mentoring young women and lifting them up to succeed, yet I find in my own role, I continually run into roadblocks when I come up to the levels of management that are largely Pākehā older males. I would like to know, and one day I would like to know how we break the bias there. The headline this week about an all-male lineup for Frontiera's International Women's Day panel, and just had to laugh at the ridiculous state of work hierarchies in New Zealand. There is such a dominant old boys club in New Zealand business. Your thoughts, Teresa?
Well, first of all, to be fair to Fonterra, they've got lots of panels. They had lots of panels, and that was just one. And Kate Daly, who's a Global Women member, explained that they've had lots of panels that day. So it's a bit unfortunate it got picked up, but I think they changed it because of that reaction. And she's doing some fabulous work in there, trying to sort of lift all boats that we're talking about. The first advice I would give is, don't believe that you can make the difference. Your spirit, your wairoa will get flattened. And so leave that organisation. There are better places to go. Look around. Don't work for situations where it's an all-white male leadership team, it's a mainly white male board, it's old world thinking, it's this or that rather than and it's not curious, it's not exploring. Don't put yourself in that situation. If you find yourself in that situation, leave, because you won't be able to change it by yourself and it can really bring you down. Go and work where you'll be valued. So that's maybe not the politically correct advice, but put yourself in a situation where you can be valued and powerful. That's my first piece of advice, because not every organisation is like what you've just described. Look, go to PwC. Last time I spoke in that building, the people who came up to me from PwC were all young Pacifica graduates who love working there, who'd come through. Some of them were graduates of the Tupi Toa program. And so that organisation, as Mark said, is being transformed at the top with partners, below with interns. Go somewhere where you'll be valued.
A question for you, Chelsea. Is mana wahine a Western concept? Isn't it more mana whānau? Don't we thrive as a collective? Hei whakaaro tāna mā tātou. And how can we help you, Chelsea, and other wahine who share your passion and talent?
Just unmute myself. Is mana wahine a Western concept? I don't know the answer to that. If it is a Western concept, I would, when I think about all our women and matriarchs and our atua Māori are women, then I would say that exists. Yes, mana whānau, for sure. I suppose, for Indigenous thinking, it is whānau hapu iwi, it is community more than it is an individual. how cool is the Māori language? We don't even have a word for he or she. It's ia. It's just them, they, like so far advanced. How do we help each other? We search each other out. We actually do, and we come together. And in my work that I'm doing at the moment, I'm really trying hard to make sure that I work with Māori women only and support Māori women, because I not to diss our tānema at all, but I just know that I really thrived in that environment. So I want to kind of give back because that helped me. You know, and the work that Matua Media does and our production crew, it's all wahine Māori. And I think it's so cool. I go pop into the office after kura every day, and or I sneaked down a kai yesterday because I was actually at home doing online learning. But I was like, well, I'll make a kai for the whānau down at the office. And it's just such a beautiful way to thrive, because you're not really thinking about mahi in the sense that mahi, you're doing community stuff and you're feeding your whāngai all the time, whether it is kai or whether it's kōrero, you're just always feeding the hingingaro and the wairua. There's just so many benefits. Yes, and making sure that you have a healthy whānau first. And whānui doesn't matter. It can be one or two people. It could be your whole iwi, whatever. But it is that community spirit. But reach out to, if you are wanting to be in this and work in this environment of creativity, and you want to surround yourself with other wahine Māori, then yes, get in touch with me. I'm really bad on Facebook. I'll tell you that right now. I don't do the face crack thing. I find it really freaky. But I'm not hard to find. I'm really not hard to find. If you want to reach out to me, please do.
I've accidentally made lots of Facebook friends by pressing the wrong button. I get you. Okay, Lara Robinson. A question for you, Mark. What do you think it will take for more male colleagues to be vocal about their support of women?
So I do think that the landscape has changed a lot very recently, sort of picking up on Teresa's comment to the last question. I think even in the last 18, 24 months, I think that that a much broader range of men are sort of suddenly realising, some of the things that have been discussed on this call. So, look, I think it's generally a sort of a safer area for men to speak up about now, and I think we've come a long way, but got a little bit to go in evolving the conversation from one that is kind of a defensive thing about that, or are you saying that we need to sort of penalise a certain group of men within the organisation, to one that's much more about moving towards the North Star? So, what's the North Star on the hill that we're trying to move our organisation towards, and what are the powerful things that we can all do? Because for some, it's interesting that's the sort of corporate way that men would normally approach any tricky question, right? They just say, what's the strategy? What's the end goal? And then relentlessly march towards it. Whereas I think there's been a tendency to focus on, here are all the problems I can see from here to there. And it's having that faith that as long as you believe in the North Star, we'll figure out the other bits on the journey together. Because there has to be a solution, because we can all see that the North Star absolutely makes sense for our organisation, for the communities that we're involved in, for the country that we live in, for the world that we live in. And so let's have that faith. So I can see that coming, but I think the more we normalise these kind of conversations and normalise these being things that get discussed in workplaces, that certainly makes a big difference.
Just a quick comment from me too, Mark, is that I think all our sons should learn how to cook, because women are too busy ruling the world. They don't have time to cook for them. Chelsea, a question for you. Global Women is an army of amazing wahine. How can we mobilise our collective strength to make the changes discussed and proposed in this kōrero? Talk is great, but only goes so far. Ngā mihi, Jenny Prisk.
well, I think a lot of it is about pūrākau and sharing stories and allowing ourselves to be front and center of those stories, because we just kind of, as a culture and as a society, we have consumed really what we've been kind of given. And, I was talking before about what distributors and exhibitors really choose to show us. We need to be more demanding about, well, we deserve to see more of ourselves on screen because we are 50% literally of the population. So we can be better about making choices about what we go and see. What kind of films do you want to support? Do you want to go and support a film that's just like, and this is terrible because I'm not really into the shoot 'em ups, whatever action films. So it's full of dudes, do you want to go see that? Or do you want to go see film like Cousins? Because it's really your money. When you go spend money at the box office, that is what the exhibitors and the distributors go, oh, right. Oh, my God, there's an audience that exists. I didn't even know because they're so blind. And literally like about when we did Wahine Māori with Disney back in 2017. I mean, bless Disney, but they really were like, oh, wow. Oh, you want to make a Maori film into it? Wow, that's so cool. Okay. I really had no idea that this audience existed. And so they honestly just thought that they were doing us a lovely favor. Like, thank you so much. Yes, they did. But they had no idea about the strength of the creativity, the excellent product that we would deliver. So that when we went back to them and said, we want to do Lion King and Frozen and some others, they were like, oh my God, of course, you Maoris know how to make amazing movies. Like, we literally had to open their eyes, like, kaka te rama. So you have to just keep pushing. And that's the only way we can do it. Literally, your dollars matter. Where you spend your money matters. Make sure you go and support women's stories, women's films, back them 100%. You have to do that. Then we will go see them and they will show them and they will go, oh my God, da-da.
Kia ora. Next question. In anticipation of today, I took a deep dive toward Global Women and its incredible members. Looking at the incredible depth of talent in your membership, it struck me that perhaps there was a level of privilege that was evident across members, from credentials to kaupapa to sitting within authoritative positions. What would you say to the women on this call who may be employees, middle management, stay-at-home mums, or those who may not ever make it to directorship or executive level? Is there a place in the future for these women to become members or supporters of the Global Women's kaupapa? Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Global Women was set up a long time ago, and it was set up really with quite a narrow definition of what women held influence and impact in New Zealand. And that definition tended to be CEOs, women at the top of corporates, partners in law firms, partners in accountancy firms, women who are on multiple boards, etc. And since in the last few years, we've really, and particularly in the last 12, 18 months, we've really widened that lens. So we still are looking for women who have mastery of their game, who do have influence and impact, but filmmakers, health management, sports management, activism, just a much wider, and also it tended to look very Auckland and Wellington centric, and now we're really actively making it clear that because of virtual, we can be much more inclusive. So it's not, we haven't said pay your $100 and anyone can come. We've still kept it with the original kaupapa, I guess, which is women who could make a big difference to shifting the dial on leadership for women in New Zealand. But we've broadened out what that influence might look like, and we will continue to do that. So, when Chelsea came aboard, Miriam Akamo came on board. It's not women who traditionally were perhaps seen as senior, but women who have huge power, huge mana, and huge influence. And that's sort of what we're actually still really trying to, get in the waka. That may change over time. We of course run courses. We're about to launch an entrepreneurs course And the other courses we're on at the moment are middle management, senior management courses for women who wouldn't necessarily be Global Women members, but need support to actually get more experience in management or get more business skills. So we run those courses for women leadership development programs.
I'll stay with you, please, Teresa. Dawn Hutchinson writes, why is the lens not focusing on where the greatest change can happen? Where do most women work unpaid, i.e. in the not-for-profit sector? That's where you will find most women working unpaid in community supporting whānau and trying to provide food security. Your thoughts, please, Teresa.
We actually do have a lot of women who are CEOs or founders of not-for-profits or charities. That's what I mean about the lens being widened. And self-employed women, all sorts. So we're not just for profit. We see the private sector as much broader than that. So, but we haven't done what is it typically, and look, you know, you could do it differently, but Agnes and I have not done what I regard as a white businessman's way to approach it, which is to say, okay, we want more Māori women, we want more women from the Bay of Plenty, we want more from South Island. Where do we go to get them? How many do we want? And when are we going to get them from the rest of it? We haven't done that. We're operating a follow the energy approach. We are standing in what we believe. We're encouraging other women. The women that we are meeting, we're saying, come and be part of this. Some say, I can't, I'm not ready, it's too soon. Others say, no, not for me, a lot come. And so then they bring others. And look at this, kōrero. Chelsea's only been a member of Global Women for a couple of months, but wow, this call, her being on this call is going to change the timbre of the organisation, change what we're going to be able to do. She's so inspiring. And so telling stories is so powerful. So I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but yeah, that's a good challenge. But we are following the energy, and members nominate members. So these 400 women nominate people. We're not the board approves it, but we're not looking, we're not deflecting. We're saying, come if you want to be part of this movement.
It's interesting too. I think you may have answered the next question. When you're trying to get people brought to bring them into your vision for an equitable world, how do you get them excited?
Well, we've been doing new members calls virtually after each, I'll call it intake, but each group of a dozen new members comes on board. Hearing each other's stories like this, but with a dozen women on the call, is amazing. And that does give a sense of, like Anna Stove's on this call, the previous chair of Global Women. So we have long-term members who've nominated new members. The new members talk about what they're doing, and wonderful things come out of that. And we have a very active community on WhatsApp. So if you're listening on this call, you're a Global Woman member and you're not on WhatsApp, get on WhatsApp. It's fantastic for sharing all sorts of things. So we will be driven by the community. When we asked the Global Women members last year what were the things they most wanted to shift the dial on, they were pay equity, gender pay gap, so women on boards, and health, women's health in New Zealand. They were the three biggest issues. And the Māori women who are running the new Māori Health Authority, the new New Zealand Health Authority, had become Global Women members. So I did encourage Lee Mathias, who knew them, to nominate them. So we are really trying to follow what our members have said. This is where we want to put our efforts.
Hi. How about you, Mark? What's your answer to that? How do you get people excited? How do you bring them into your vision for an equitable world?
I think that these days most of the people that you encounter actually are really passionate about an equitable world. So I can't think of many occasions when I encounter people who don't care or actively do not want to perpetuate differences and inequality. What I think is more the norm, and particularly in the business world, is people who just don't have any sense of what is the next right step. So I can see that North Star so I think first of all you have to talk about the North Star, right? You have to describe and paint a picture. We're all story driven people, as has been said many times in this. So you have to describe that story and how solving for that is going to help you achieve your organisational goals, going to reduce inequality in our country across many lenses. But they generally get stuck at the next bit is, so what's the next thing to do? And the thing after that, and the thing after that. Because to go back to my opening story, if you haven't been given a set of the commemorative night vision goggles, you actually can't see the beginning of the pathway. So I think the sharing of stories about what has and hasn't worked between people is incredibly powerful, and just sharing those insights about when an organisation has some success, not seeing that as some competitive advantage to be kept so that they can be the top of the next list that gets released, but sort of actually more sort of open IP that we share amongst each other, because the end goal really here is to eliminate these differences across the whole, across all of our community. And the best way for each of our organisations to be awesome is if our communities are awesome in these respects as well.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Just a note from Penny Harrison. We have leaders from not-for-profit organisations on our leadership programs now. If you know of organisations who would benefit, please reach out to Global Women, as we also have people keen to provide support for these women. So, Mark, this is International Women's Day. What are you going to do tomorrow about continuing the momentum?
My teams have presented me with a long list of things, to that whole point about the re-engineering. So we participated in the Mind the Gap exercise this year, but that's sort of getting to the start line of that process. It was releasing some high level information. So included in the next steps is going to that next level of detail. Our teams were, their response was, that's fantastic, we're so proud that you've participated in that, but now we want all these different lenses, different parts of the business, different a sort of seniority of people within the organisation, and so I think having the commitment and the mindset that there is something to do tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, and it's not like, okay, we've got the Mind the Gap reporting done and that's locked and loaded until next year. I think that's really important. And then there's a range of other things that all organisations are working on at the moment around hybrid working's been so awesome in many respects around dealing with some of the problems that typically would have fallen on women, but it also runs the risk, if we don't grasp it properly, of exacerbating a whole bunch of those areas and entrenching sort of different aspects. So what's our plan, as we become more and more virtual, how do we make sure that we support people to continue to be effective and thrive when the external dynamic is changing so quickly? So I could go on, but I suspect you've got questions for other people.
Thank you, Mark. A question, please, for you, Chelsea. One of the slides that we were showing pre-Zui pointed out that girls are most likely to receive less pocket money and do more housework than boys. Chelsea, is that something that you experienced growing up, and is that something that your own children are experiencing?
I just have to have a quick giggle because, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Because yesterday, my 9-year-old has had this broken Pakaru iPad screen for ages, to the point where it's probably really dangerous. She's going to cut herself any minute now. So we did this little negotiation. I was like, okay, I'm going to get it fixed for you. And it was expensive. So I said to her, okay, you're going to have to work for this. You have to pay it back. So it's going to cost me $295 to get this fixed, Hinekahu. How many jobs are you going to do? She goes, oh, well, I don't know. How much is the washing worth? About $1. I was like, okay, that's $295. there's 295 jobs, sorry, 295 jobs. She was like, oh, nah, hang on a minute, I reckon it's worth $2. So she knew right then and there just to double it up, my girl. She's the one. Pocket money for myself, I think I remember like 50 cents, like 50 cents was it. But jobs were like, what, just keep your room tidy and stuff now, eh? I think we should reward our daughters or reward our kids, not just to whakapai te whare or whatever, but maybe actually be kind human beings, do something for someone else, or like reward them for bravery, or reward them for things that girls don't necessarily get rewarded for, like, oh yes, whatever, we talk about labels of, oh, you're so pretty, or brush your hair and all these things. Like, well, how about like my 9-year-old just learned how to skateboard. She said one lesson, now she's skateboarding to school. She's like in this girls skate group, and oh my god, I'm so proud of her. I almost want to give her pocket money for that, just for going out there and being a badass on a little skateboard. But I would rather reward her for things like that, rather than maybe what we traditionally did.
Goodbye. Teresa, women have so many societal expectations placed on them based on gender. Do you think it's become more apparent?
Well, I think actually the way Mark described it is right. It used to be so baked in. For most people, it wasn't apparent at all. And for a few, it was. And they would have felt like they were pushing water uphill with a rake because no one even understood what they were talking about. Whereas now, there's still unconscious bias. The gender pay gap is only partly explained by occupational segregation. Still a chunk of it is unexplained except by bias, conscious or unconscious. So there still is unconscious bias. And of course, I started by saying, we create some of that ourselves, but it is more now national kōrero around this. You think about today, the Herald editorial today, the fact that, they had opinion pieces from me and from Antonio Watson, they were really trying. Now, I know some feminists, Vicky Saunders, for example, who boycotts International Women's Day this year. I'm sick of talking on panels. I do it for 13 hours a day every year. Nothing changes. It's got to be 365 days a year. So I get that, but I feel a bit the same about like Māori Language Week this last couple of years. It's been treated really seriously. It used to be seen as a bit of a joke, dismissed, and now it's really, really, honoured, really taken seriously. People want to do the right thing. So I feel like this is a good time to push even further. And look, just, these are a couple of just quite small things, but, getting the abortion law taken out of the Crimes Act, and actually, getting that one for women. When you look at the rollback of reproductive freedoms in the US that women are dealing with at the moment, and those things are important. I mean, buying Kate Shepherd House, we have all these monuments to the men in our history. We need more monuments to women, and government actually buying that house. It's a small thing, but it's a significant meeting place for wahine. And so, gosh, I think that this is a powerful time for us to raise our collective voice and to keep pushing, because there's a feeling of movement. There's a feeling of reciprocity. We just got to keep going.
You would have noticed in 2020, we were talking about during COVID's first lockdown, we were talking about reimagining so much in our society. 2 years on, I admit there may be a bit of COVID fatigue, but is that vision there? Is that purpose there, do you think, to reimagine the landscape?
I think New Zealand's a leader in mandatory climate change reporting. And I want to pick up what Chelsea said before. If you go back to Indigenous wisdom, you don't need mandatory climate change reporting because it's built in. You want to be a good ancestor. You respect the ancestors that came before you. But we need the Western paradigm is sort of catching up. It's sort of now it's becoming, pick up Mark's point, it's not just about doing the right thing. It's actually now a penalty if you don't. Investors won't invest in you if it looks like old, pale, male and stale. It doesn't care a shit about the environment. That's actually not acceptable anymore. So it's been a really slow journey, but COVID has accelerated that. We're not going to go right back to the old. So yeah, I do think there has been a shift. Yeah, I do.
Final words to you, Chelsea. What would you like to leave our attendees with? Some wise words, some wise thoughts?
Actually, you know, there's a question here's some wise thought. How am I, darling? Come and say hello to these amazing, incredible women on this global call. And say hi to Auntie Lena. This is the future.
All the water.
Oh no, someone took all that water. Now that's not good future. Now here's wise words. Look at her t-shirt. It says, hang on, straighten that up. It says, always was, always will be. Yes. And that's actually Australian and Indigenous Australian flag, but it's everywhere around the world. Always was, always will be.
Thirsty.
That's my word. That's my parting words of wisdom. Oh, there's no water in my phone. Can someone please deliver some water? Just kidding. I'll get you some water, babe. Always was, always will be.
Bye. Mark, final words.
Thank you. Look, I think obviously a lot of challenges have been identified in this call, but I do think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic right now. I think that we've talked a lot about the intersection of advancing the conversation around gender with the amazing progress that's been made around the renaissance of Te Ao Māori in New Zealand, and other lenses of diversity. With post-COVID, there's no question that the landscape has changed. The way that employers and businesses are thinking about the experiences that they want to give their people, and the ESG revolution. All organisations are having to rethink, why do we exist, and how do we create a sustainable future that's going to keep us relevant going forward. So I think there's never been a better sort of moment in the ether to push hard in a bunch of these areas. And I know that runs the risk of sounding Pollyanna-ish, but I think that it's absolutely true.
Teresa, final words.
I actually can't do better than what Chelsea said. Your stories matter and your dollars matter. As someone who spends my life really living those two things, it makes a difference. Be a conscious consumer. We live in a capitalist world, but you can be a conscious capitalist and you can change the system. So stand in your own power and allow your unfolding, which will be our unfolding.
Kāti. Tēnā koutou toko toru nei, kua pai nei wā koutou kōrero ki mua I te aroaro o tēnei hui nā tuihono. That ends our online forum for Global Women celebrating International Women's Day. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd also like to thank Agnes Snyder, Chantel Lincoln, Ollie, our man Ollie, and Vicky Price, the behind the scenes, hands-on team that made this online seminar possible. Stay optimistic. We will always be. Always was and always be. Yeah, always will be. I love that. It probably sound better in Māori too. But thank you very much for joining us this year as we celebrated International Women's Day. Tēnā koutou.
Ngā mihi nui, Wina, that was great. Thank you so much.
Global Women would like to thank all of you for attending today and for contributing to our vision of a gender equitable and prosperous Aotearoa New Zealand. Join us in our promise of everyday advancing women so that together we can break the bias. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.